I think I'd rather be here, and I'm going to make your life interesting because I might actually just walk around. So I don't know who's on the cam, but watch me for the changes, okay? I'm Andrew Shaver, and I'm the realization director at Redstorm here and I always say here in Raleigh because I live in Toronto, so it's actually in Kerry, but for me it's kind of the same thing, but I know it's not. I know Raleigh and Kerry and Durham are very separate, but they're one. But you know, in this work from home world, I am in Toronto, and when I think of Redstorm, I think of Raleigh. So here we are in Raleigh. I came on board about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, and I'm not using the mic because I come from a theater background, and I had my first mentor in the theater, a theater legend, Canadian theater legend by the name of Douglas Campbell, at one point said, "Theaters are the death, microphones are the death of theater, dear boy." And far be it for me to contradict him. He then went on to say, "Directors are the death of theater, dear boy." And I took umbrage at that because, you know, no one bats 1,000, even Douglas Campbell. Certainly no one on the Philadelphia Phillies, hey, Dansky? So I'm going to be here talking, and I might head over there and talk about it through the mic. But I come from the world of theater, and that's kind of what I want to talk about here. I joined the Redstorm team in a full-time capacity about a year ago. And prior to that, I had started directing cinematics, about 4 or 5 years ago in the video game world. And then prior to that, it was my only experience in video games was as an actor. I went to a theater school in Paris in, well, as my sister likes to say, decades and decades ago. It was just 2 decades ago, 20 years ago. I went to a theater school in Paris, and ostensibly it was a performance school. It was about how to learn how to act. But they approached it through the body. It was a physical theater school. And so we learned all sorts of different theatrical traditions, world theatrical traditions, commedia dell'arte, Buffon, Greek tragic chorus, clown, which was a great 8 weeks. It's where we all realized just how unfunny we were for about 8 weeks, trying to make each other laugh. So we did clown, we did mime. And I'm not a very good mime. I do know that, I know that you need to sort of show you're about to do it, and then do the thing, and then show you're about to let go of it, and then let go of it. I understood that aspect of it. That approach to acting and to theater is what's informed me as a performer and then subsequently as a director. I enjoy watching bodies in space. You're watching my body in space right now. So we learned, and I'm watching your bodies in space. I'm moving, you're fixed, more or less. But if I was to put a camera on you, none of you are fixed. Your eyes are moving, your nostrils are moving, your hands are moving. So we're all moving. But more or less, we're in a situation where you are in a fixed spot looking at me moving up here. And so at this school, we studied how the body moves and the stories the body tells in space by the way it moves. And I move in space differently than every other person in here. We all move in our own individual way. To an outsider, maybe to an alien, I would say that any able-bodied human walking around is going to look to them similar. But when we look at it in the minutia, we see differences, and we see different narratives. We see different emotions. We have different stories and histories that we bring to bear through our body. And that approach to performance and then subsequently to storytelling has been really formative for me as an actor, as a director in theater, and now more recently as a director for cutscenes and cinematics, and then specifically in virtual reality, because I'm the realization director on a VR game. So I'm going to get to all that. That's just a little bit of a sort of foundational groundwork there. So when I came out of that school, we started making theater, and one of the core tenets of theater, and I say any kind of narrative across disciplines, but for me it came from theater, talking the specifics to get general, was a place and an event. And the place, this room, 301B, the event, my talk. And so that's what's happening. The theater is for the next 50 minutes is that. Where are we? Who's there? What are they doing? That transcends theater, TV, film, video games, any sort of, not just narrative, but I mean, there's a narrative implicit in that, and my work has generally been a narrative-focused work. So take that approach to creation, and whether it's theater creation or whether it's game development from a narrative perspective. And I started to make plays with my team of people, with my ensemble, with my theater company, which is akin to what we do in game development. We make the gameplay with our team, and it takes all kinds of people to make it. I'm probably not saying anything that you guys don't know, dipping in and out of things like that. I'm going to assume that, because I came to it so late, I don't know how much you know about it. You probably know more than I do. But what I do know is that I have decades upon decades of theater experience. And so that's what I want to talk about, and how it's informing how I make, or how I do my job in video games. Having said that, how many people here do have theater experience, for example? All right, okay, great. So are we actors? Are we directors, writers, technicians? What do you do? And what have you done?
Performance.
You're a performer, great. Anyone else want to share their perspective in the theater world? You want to. You're just trying to decide what to say.
Yeah, because like I've done stuff in acting,
Yep.
writing, and directing
Right.
and whatnot, but not like to an extreme magnitude. Just figuring out what is the most relevant, I suppose.
You tell me, what is an extreme magnitude when it comes to theater?
That's a really good point, because it's just saying that it's pretty surface level, but I mean, like high school plays,
Great.
taking extra courses. Like I've done stuff with stage fighting. I've done stuff
Right.
with, a bunch
Right.
of different things.
So stage fighting, you know how to use your body, and you know how to use your body in space to tell a story in relation to someone else who's using their body in space to tell a story together. Great. The rest of you guys, guys in a general gender sense, how many of you are video game developers and work in games? So okay, so not quite as many as I thought. So the rest of you guys, what's your perspective? Where are you coming from? If you're willing to share, yeah.
Well, coming from two perspectives. One, my avocation is screenwriting, and the
Great.
other is medical writing.
Oh wow.
So, we do medical simulations and things like that. It's not really my area. I just like to have that 360-degree view of my industry and your industry and the creative space. How
Great.
How do you think? Because I have my own creative process, my own perspective on things, but it's fun for me to hear your perspective, how you think.
Great.
Your process.
It's fun for me to hear your perspective as well. So to your point, that's I think what I'm having the most fun in this job with, which is bringing my theater perspective to bear in a group of people who may not have any theater perspective, but have a wealth of other experience that I have yet to even scrape the surface of. And so it becomes about ensemble, and it becomes, and it doesn't need to be a performance ensemble. And in this day and age, we're all on teams talking, and when it comes to the design of a cinematic that we're going to shoot in 3 weeks, I'm interested in everyone's perspective on that. I think as the director, it's got to come through a final sort of clear lens so that it's cohesive. All these ideas are cohesive, and it's going towards what we want to achieve. But I'm not so narcissistic to think that the answers are always going to come from me. There needs to be a solution that comes through a final person. But for me, it's about a collective imagination that is always going to be more interesting than one single, from my perspective, one single perspective. And maybe those are shortcomings in my imagination. I don't know. Which is why my work throughout the last 20 years has all been ensemble-based. I've been a writer, I've been a director, I've been an actor in a group of people who are all sharing the reins in that regard. So how many of you are familiar with the notion of motion capture? Okay, I figured most of you, great. But those of you who are not, I certainly wasn't until I did it as an actor. And the first game I did that on, I came out of school, I made theater for a better part of a decade, and then I started acting in video games. I was living in Montreal at the time, so any of you who watch Mythic Quest know that Montreal is a bit of a hub for video games. And maybe if you don't watch Mythic Quest, you might know that. Or maybe you don't know, who cares? You know now, Montreal's a bit of a hub, whatever. So I started acting in video games there. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, because I certainly wasn't, when you're acting in motion capture, you're wearing this ridiculous lycra suit with all these reflective balls all over you, and it's being captured in 360 degrees by a bunch of other cameras, which are collecting that data, and that data is then given to animators. They animate it, they put a character model on it, and then they make magic happen, and then you see you in a video game all of a sudden. It's wonderful. My first experience through it was like that. I wasn't talking, I was just the body. They can disassociate that. You can get a voiceover actor to go into the studio who gives the voice, you do the body, they put the two together, and then magic is made with two people. The complicity between your body and that person's voice. And then there's full performance capture, which I would have a helmet on, and it's capturing my face and my voice and my body, and that's my character. And there I am up on screen. Not necessarily my likeness, but everything else. So when I went into the motion capture studio for the first time, I felt like I was going into a theater. Because theater is basically just an empty space that you're going to fill with your story. And the motion capture studio is an empty space that you are going to fill with your story. Not alone, with a multitude of people around you who are doing their job, which is, weakest link, all of a sudden it just falls apart. So in this room, for example, the motion capture studios are not dissimilar to this room. They're slightly larger, but there'll be an empty space in the middle. I put the suit on, I get in the middle of the space, and I act. So in this configuration, that's motion capture. Now in this configuration, from a theatrical perspective, it's an us-them. This is what we call proscenium. You're fixed, I'm up here, and it's there would be a wall up there, proscenium, stage. It's like looking through a screen. You are in a fixed position, but you can look from a different perspective, and you don't have to follow me. You could keep looking over there and get a different perspective. That's proscenium. Now, if I came out to here, now we're in a bit of a thrust, where I'm coming out and you guys are not all the way. Stage ends here. And I'm in a thrust perspective, where you're getting a much different perspective than they are at the side. If I get going, all of a sudden I'm in an alley perspective, and now I've got audience on two sides, and you are in relation to each other. So you're seeing each other and me, which tells its own story as well. And then if I started coming in here, well, now I'm kind of getting into an immersive sort of theater. why I didn't want to stand behind here. I don't want to be limited to this being the playing space when I have all that I could use. And you can choose to follow me or not. It's up to you. Think of this entire convention, this whole game conference. Think of ECGC as the play. Let's take it one day at a time. It doesn't need to be, it could be all 3 days, but let's take it one day at a time. You could do whatever you want. You've got a lanyard, you can be wherever you want. You could be upstairs right now, you could be in here with me. You've chosen to follow the path to come in here. And at any point, like 2 other people earlier, they left. They didn't want to be here anymore. That's totally fine. They're going to do something else. So the comparable for me is that this is the theater space, an immersive theater space. Keep it into this room, take it out into the whole center, convention center. It's like the sandbox in a game that we built, that you're able to play. There's a golden path through that sandbox, which has brought all of you to here. I wanted you to come here. You guys followed the golden path and you're in here. Terrific, thank you very much. But at any point, you can leave. So that's the kind of perspective that I'm interested in taking when it comes to shooting cinematics in virtual reality, and then just on a larger sense of like how philosophically I think about video games now. At this point, I just want to open up. This isn't the Q&A. I want it to be more. I'd like to have a dialogue. So if there are any questions or thoughts, just please feel free to just shout them out at any time. You raise your hand, whatever. Yes.
What projects did you work on in Montreal?
Great. Sure. Yeah. So I came to this through as an actor to begin with, through some Assassin's Creed games, and as a voiceover, as a VO actor through Deus Ex and some AC games and Thief. And then about 5 years ago, it's a great question, thank you, that led me to where I wanted to go. He's not a plant, by the way. I directed the cinematics for Far Cry New Dawn, and that was the first time I started, I worked in video games as anything other than a performer. And so as some of you may know, Far Cry is a first-person game. And so you as the player, you are, it's from your perspective. And you don't see yourself unless that player puts his hands out, or that character puts his hands out, and then you see yourself. But otherwise, it's just from that perspective. So when I was shooting that, there was an inherent challenge there, because in a first-person perspective like that, you need to, as a director, motivate an actor who is in the scene, who is also the camera person in the scene. So you have to negotiate between getting a great shot, because they're wearing the camera on their head, and you have to negotiate getting them where they need to be. If everyone wants to see this, I have to come up here as the character and be in his face like that. Or if I can't justify motivating the character, maybe it doesn't make sense for the character, so the character stays over here, and then you don't quite get the shot as in as much detail as maybe you'd want, because I'm unable to motivate the character to go there. And in Far Cry, from a first-person perspective, I can't move the character up there. You're fixed in space in that cinematic. You are getting what we shot, and that's that. You have autonomy in the game to move around, and then when you come into a cinematic, you're still in the same perspective, but you can't move anymore. You're on a train being pushed by us until the cinematic ends, and you see it the way we want you to see it, and then you're out. But in VR, that's immersive breaking. The whole point for me, and I don't think I'm saying anything groundbreaking here, in VR is that you're completely immersed in that environment. Whether it's in a game or does anyone work in VR here? Great. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So when we're making a cinematic in VR, then that's why I think of it as immersive theater. Because we want the player, i.e. you, to be able to continue to move around and have full autonomy in the cinematic. and see it from whatever perspective you want to see it in. Still first person, like Far Cry. But Far Cry, you were fixed. You couldn't move. And now in VR, we want you to be able to move. Obviously, that offers some obstacles. It provides a lot of interesting freedom and an experience for the player, but it offers a lot of obstacles for us as the people developing it. Because we don't know where you'll be at any point in the cinematic. You could be wherever the heck you want to be, unless we figure out ways to find moments where we know you're going to be in that position. Or we can find the space in such a way that we know that you're here. That if our cinematic, all of a sudden I'm on an island here, and it ends there, we know that I'm not going to be able to get into your space because there's a big chasm between me and you, and so I'm always going to be over here. And that's one way of doing it. But in a world where that chasm doesn't make sense, and I want to be in your space, then we have to think strategically about how to block these scenes. So I think that might bring us to an interesting point here, where I just wanted to show a cinematic from Far Cry, where it's a first-person perspective, where we shot, and then maybe we'll have a look at treating it as though it were in VR. What we would do differently, how we would address the obstacles presented therein. So, let me just remember where. Correct. 103, 42. Is that up? That's up. Great. Great. 103. We'll go from there. Oh, of course I didn't join the network. How do we get online? Raleigh Convention Center. Well, you know what? I could probably just hotspot it, right? I'll just hotspot it, guys. Now's a good time to field some questions as I figure this out. Does anyone have any thoughts on what I'm saying? Does it make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just kind of interested in how you go about designing things to guide the player's attention.
Yeah.
Versus just happening regardless of the player's paying attention.
Right. So in terms of like, we want the player to look in your. I want the player to look in your direction, for example, and how we guide the player who could be looking over here or who could be looking over here to look over there. I mean, we could do it through lighting. Just make it darker, make it more visually interesting over there. That's sort of an interesting passive way of doing it. Does anyone know how to get on the Wi-Fi? Should I be able to get on the Raleigh Convention Center? No one knows. Okay.
I just connected.
Say that again?
There's no like authentication.
I don't know why it's not going.
Maybe it's slow.
Yeah, okay. Could not be joined. Okay. I'm going to get back to your question I'm going to turn this off. And then there are obviously more active ways where we could create a ruckus over there, and it could be an aural thing. And so I'm over here and I hear something and I look over there, and the beat after the thing that I want the player to see happens. So then it's a question of timing. And for me, that's where the theater comes in, because regardless of what kind of perspective, that's irritating to just watch spin, hey? Well, click on it again, hey? That's what I did. So let me. 10th time, eh? Oh, it might be actually. Guys, we might be onto something. That's where my experience is making theater. Okay, great. I'm gonna come back to you in a sec. So wait. So we should like maybe dim the lights, eh? To get a better view of that. Is that just back there? Are you doing dim the lights, or are you going on to a different path? That's fine. Just dim the lights on your way up. That's great.
While you're up, right?
While you're up, dim the lights. Great. Okay. Right. So in terms of, okay. Oh, this is the wrong cinema. This is the wrong one. Oh, he's coming in. So this is the player coming to meet Ethan. So I'll just talk about some other aspects on the way. So this, as a realization director, in this game I wasn't, but I would be tasked in my current game of understanding what we want to see in what we call the living world, the crowd life. And from a film perspective, like the background. Or in the entire mise-en-scene when it comes to theater. So not just the main focus. What else is happening? There's a guy pouring water, like I don't know what he's doing, but he's got a bucket and some water. There's a little kid who is looking off into the distance. There's some guy watching. So these are all just the considerations of the crowd life, the living world. And so when we talk about realization, that's part of the job. So here we go. We would decide when that guy turns and leaves. The guy's working. Does this guy look up? No, he doesn't look up. So, I picked this scene for a few reasons, and when we get into it, I'll talk about it. Come into space, you can't control it. We control that look. So for example, we control that look. But to your point, in VR, we're not going to control that look. And so rather than have the player turn, it's a very simple thing, and then see Ethan, we would want the door to close and have the player turn around, and then Ethan's there and say, you aren't what I'm expecting. For example, that would be a more active way of doing that.
He said to me, he came here looking for the old man. Do you have the book?
So we're setting up an object handover. He asks if we have the book, and then the player, you, put it out. But you didn't put it out. We put it out. You had nothing to do with that. And in VR, we want you to have everything to do with that. We want you to be able to put that book out, because otherwise we're breaking the immersion of what it is to be involved in a cinematic in VR. And so in this situation, we're able to do whatever we want. We put it out, and Ethan walks to us and takes the book because he knows where it is. But in VR, I could be over here and Ethan's over there. And I could be holding the book out over here. Ethan can't walk to me because he doesn't know where I am. So in that situation, there's an obstacle there of how we achieve that handover. And so what we would do, well, let's just get through the cinematic and we'll talk about those moments.
I've searched everywhere for this
No.
book. Joseph said the one who found it would be ordained by God.
So now he's looking up at the portrait of Joseph that we saw, his father, when we came into space. In VR, the more we're able to find points of focus like that aren't the player, for the same reason that I keep going back on, because the player can be anywhere, the more we mitigate the risk of Ethan, the NPC, looking at where we thought the player would be, but the player clearly isn't. Ethan's looking, you guys are the player, we thought you would be over here, so Ethan's talking like this, and you're over there the whole time, and Ethan thinks he's talking to you. He's not, you guys are over here. So to mitigate the sort of the immersion breaking feeling of that, you can find focus that isn't the player, that we know is in the space. know we're here in VR. Far Cry does.
I'm the one they turned to when he disappeared into the north. I'm the one who has held this.
And so now he's in a position where the player can't get behind him, upstage of him, which is great. But the player can go to the side or to the left in VR. And so now he's walking back and forth in a space that the player might be in,
Protected them from the locusts and the snakes.
which isn't ideal.
I'm safe within these walls. Not the old man. Ray!
Except he's getting all worked up. So it benefits us that he's so worked up, because then he can just push us out of the way. We can have a systemic sort of push from the NPC that gets us out of the way, if you can build it. And that's fine. But in a scene where he's less worked up, that might not feel great as a player, to get pushed out of the way by the NPC. See, these are all obstacles that we face in staging in VR.
He ran away. You came here looking for his help. But Joseph is dead. No one wants to acknowledge this.
So if we put him in the back, into a corner there, and I.e. here, and spoke to you, then we're okay. He could look out like this, and he's going to be looking in your direction. And we're going to avoid that feeling of him not looking at us and breaking the immersion.
Understand that he was not a messiah, he was just a man. Help me show them. Bring back proof of his death, and I'll help you. But New Eden will not allow you to travel north until you prove yourself worthy.
Here's another situation. He's going to make a mark on the player. But again, doesn't know where the player is.
You people know this mark.
So I don't know how we do that in VR. We can't have Ethan cut his hand, get some blood, and find us like that. So there's another obstacle. That's the puzzle that I find so interesting in shooting VR scenes, where you need to balance the technical sort of limitations with a nuanced, natural feeling performance and staging of the performance. So in this moment where he has cut his hand, and he's going to make a mark on the player, let's just think of it, the function of that. The function of the mark is, as he said, the people where we're going will recognize the mark. So the player needs to have a mark. That's what needs to happen. How can we, in VR, how can we do that? Does anyone, what's a way over this obstacle if Ethan can't come to us necessarily? Yeah.
They can make a mark on the hand of the character, since we see the hands of the players generally moving forward. Make a mark.
Great. Who would make the mark? Who makes the mark in this world?
Maybe he is like holding out, you have to hold out your hand, like you have to walk up to him and hold out your hand. That he makes the mark.
Right.
Or you can just make the mark on yourself, like he's holding out the thing to make the mark.
Sure.
Pick it up and do like a snap.
Sure. These are both interesting options. You had your hand. Was that one of them? Like I'm doing to you right now. Right. Right. And then it triggers. And then the volume, you said come, I come, it triggers, and then we give it. Great. If I didn't come to you, you said that. You said, come here, whatever. And I didn't. Now, if we're in a position where the cinematic, in order to achieve this next beat, that needs to happen, you need to exist in a waiting loop, waiting for the player to get there, which is just what happens. And so, rather than having you just sit idly waiting, we would, like with the book handover at the beginning, we would present, and like you mentioned, we would present, have the NPC present the target that the player would put the book in, or the volume that the player needs to come into for the mark, and then probably have them put their hand on a table or hold their hand out, at which point the system knows the hand is there. Ethan can grab your hand, for example, and put it in, put the mark on. So we would have to keep you existing naturally as we can in this idle. So, for example, let's take the book, Ghosts of a Marriage by Richard Dansky. This is the book that he is handing over. So, who wants to get up and be Ethan waiting for the book? Terrific. So Ethan's asked for the book, puts his hand out, and now I got my target. Actually, you want to go over there so everyone can see? Appreciate it. He says, give me the book. Give me the book. Terrific. I might have you say it a little nicer.
Please hand me the book.
Right. Use the same lines. Give me the book, but say it nicer.
Give me the book.
Not bad. Okay. Be more impatient.
Give me the book.
Right. Okay. Great. Any other direction you want to try? I'll give him the book. What's that?
Be desperate.
Desperate.
Give me the book.
Great. That's more what Ethan's doing up here. Terrific. So at that point, he holds out his hand, presents the target for me to put it in, and this is his body language. Doesn't look desperate. Getting back to what I was saying before, but that's fine. There's interesting contradictions here. We want to read your body language, and what is this saying? What is this saying, regardless of what the direction we're giving him? What kind of, come on over, right there, actually. What is this saying to you guys? Give me something. Say that again. Casually impatient, right?
Exasperated, maybe?
Sure. Can you be more exasperated in your physicality? Oh, full hand in the pocket. That sells it. That sells it. Great, great. So he's got the target out, and I can come and immediately give him the book, and then he moves on. If I don't come over and give him the book, like in the instance that we were talking about, he needs to continue to exist in this loop, in this physicality. Can't change it too much, because if I came and gave you the book in the middle of all that, the animation, if this is his physicality and the animation is waiting for the book transfer to be in this physicality, if he moves out of this physicality, he needs to get back to that physicality so that when I give him the book and achieve the handover, the animation plays naturally and doesn't pop back into this physicality. We laugh, but oh boy, we spend hours shooting this. Right. So here he is, less exasperated now. Feeling, I think, kind of conspicuous because he thought he was just going to be up for a second. Yeah, now he's up. He's the focus of the talk currently. So there we are. And so then after, if I don't do it, the player doesn't do it, Ethan still exists. He's waiting. After, I don't know, 10 or 12 seconds, it's probably warranted that he would then say something more about wanting the book. And, give me another line about wanting this book.
Did you hear me? I said I need the book.
Great. And those of you who play games, obviously, it's probably everybody here, you're familiar with this. And then 10 or 12 more seconds would go, and we decide as we're shooting, is he getting more and more exasperated? Or is he getting more and more bored, for example? These are two, different tacks we can take. You choose one, so 10 or 12 more seconds go by, and I still haven't given him the book.
I'm getting tired.
Great. So what we saw Rob do there was he took an inhale. So that's called an idle break. So that just gives a little flavor to the waiting. So he's not just a statue. He went, I'm getting tired of waiting. And he got back to the original position so that at any point, if the player executes the handover, he's in that position. So now we've done 3, and now if the player leaves the volume, a sort of volume that we've created, let's say the volume is the radius of maybe 4 feet around him. So if the player's in that volume, he'll continue to stay, and the system can track that, in this idle loop. And if the player leaves it, we can create what's called a disengaged loop. So that's, yeah, you can put your hand down, and if he's going to talk on that, if he's going to say something, he's going to say it as he goes down. He's going to go, I'm tired of waiting, just give me the book when you're ready. And then he would exist in a loop like this. Then when the player gets back into the volume, you would put your hand back up, get back into the original position, and say, oh, you're back. And be ready to take the book, we get the book, and then we continue. And then the scene moves on. So in VR, thank you. A round of applause. Terrific performance. So when we're shooting in VR, when there is interaction with the NPCs, which is foundational to an immersive experience, you don't want to be just observing the way you are in this cinematic. You want to be engaged in it. So we're always trying to find the ways to engage the player, to give the book, to take the knife and make their own mark, to open the door, to whatever, to be engaged. We have to take the time to shoot it, all the variations therein. So I have another scene that I'm interested in showing from Far Cry 3625. So this is a big barbecue scene. Lots of people, lots of living world.
Come on over. Just getting started. Get it while it's hot.
So she said, come on over, and the player went because we told them to. But again, she doesn't know in VR if you're going to do that. So we have to take a totally different tack on this.
This won't last long.
I will take that as a compliment.
So we brought the player over here to get a 3-shot and then a 2-shot. But in VR, you look at it how you want to look at it. We create an ideal for you to look at. Like I think the question was over there about, you make nice lighting and you make the point of focus, the sound. You want to direct the player like you do in theater. You want the audience's eyes to be stage left, then you do something to bring their eyes stage left before the event happens. If I wanted you to see, what's your name? Joe. Joe? Yeah, great. If I wanted you to see Joe just sneezed like quietly into his arm, I think. If I wanted you to see that, I would want to direct your eyes over there somehow. Currently, I don't think any of you saw that, right? Because you were looking at me, because I was just making so much noise over here. I was visual noise, oral noise. So I would want something, I would maybe look over there. You would eventually follow my gaze over there, and he would sneeze, you would catch that, and I would continue. So it's about directing the eye in theater on stage when you have the option to look wherever you want. It's the same thing in VR. In first person here, no, we're directing you. You're not looking anywhere else.
I'd say it's working. We all need a little nail time.
Except for her, she's got no quit.
Don't expect that to change.
So she just handed us a plate. She's either going to have to stand there and go through the whole thing that we just did over here, and it's going to be immersive breaking. Do you want the plate? Please take the plate. We're at a barbecue. Take your plate. Why don't you take your plate? That's terrible, right? So at that point, I would, well, I'll ask you guys, what would you do? What would you do? Yeah, great. We've already spoken. We'll come to you. Yes, you. Good idea? What was your idea? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's a pretty standard, great, terrific idea. The plate would be there, and she would say, there's food if you want it. Or some, I'm not the writer, Dansky. You'll come up with a great line for the actors to say. And then the player can go and take the plate if they want the plate. And if we need the cinematic to continue because that plate is going to be super important and the cinematic can only continue until once the player has the plate, well then there's another focus. Okay, we've got to figure out a way to make sure the player gets that plate. Otherwise, it's just incidental. Like if you're hungry, take the plate. And then I can go over there and I can pick up water, I can pick up my plate, and meanwhile, the scene is continuing to happen around us. That's immersive theater, and that's the way we would do it in VR.
Then when I told the hotel I was pregnant with you.
So there, she just delivered a nice emotional connection to her daughter, and then Carmina, the daughter, we saw her turn around and hear it, and then come towards her mom because we placed the camera there. But in VR, again, we can't do that. So what we would do, to your point, is maybe we would have her say that, Mom say that, and then we could have Carmina go, "Oh," or whatever. We would look there, and then we would see Carmina go, "Mom," and the scene could continue as is. So it's about like we did with Joe. We need to direct the eye with visual or oral noise.
You're also happy to do that, huh?
Not perfect, still work to do, but it sure is nice to have something to be happy about again.
I'll drink to that.
So that's, you know, an ideal shot, to have the three of them with stuff in the background. You can still set stuff up like that, you know, and hope that the player is going to see it from there. That's fine. But if the player needs to be there, you've got to be really careful about that
Now, come on, go grab a
and
drink.
do all the things that we've been talking about. So she just said, "Go get a drink," and now it's like the plate. Now we go and get the drink on our own, in our own time. But the difference here is, as soon as the player takes the drink, it cues the fireworks, which are the next beat. That's a problem to everybody, these fireworks.
We need to get the kids inside. Come on.
And then you follow. So, in that situation, it's a relaxed barbecue. She could then just say, grab yourself a beer, do whatever you want. And the moment you do take the beer, you can just exist in this world. The moment you take the beer, the system can trigger the fireworks. And then you're just living in the story until that moment. If you don't take the beer, then I'm not sure what we do. I'm not sure what happens in that situation. We just continue to exist. In theory, you could just continue to, you shoot the loop of everybody existing. And if you make the loop long enough, it's going to be harder for the player to, eventually they'll notice that things are looping. But in theory, you could just loop that ad infinitum and exist in that world. Yes?
Well, something like that. I've never played Far Cry, but I'm guessing.
How dare you?
Well, I'm guessing the fireworks are triggering some sort of event in which the player would take over. Could you then not make it just like some based on time passing?
Yeah.
Where eventually it doesn't really matter if they take
Yes,
the beer now.
yes, of course you could. Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, time passing could be the trigger. Great. Does anyone, 12:18, look at that. That's kind of great. Does anyone have any thoughts or questions about any of this or anything else? Yeah. I am, yeah. I don't know if I am. I'm really confused, and so I'm taking Dansky's lead on that, and he's shaking his head. So I guess I'm not allowed to say it. But eventually you'll know, and oh boy, it's exciting. Yeah.
How complex?
Very. The answer is very. Next.
Well, just like you mentioned having the player needing to do things.
Yeah.
I guess if you know the start, player like in the hut, player walks into the hut, and the end is whatever the end point of that.
Yeah.
If those are fixed because the player got there and then the player starts there.
Yeah.
How much wiggle room is there to like? Because at that point the player is the actor, so you're dealing with an actor that may or may not be cooperative, and may
Right.
leave the other actors hanging. Is there worth in like having enough grantings so that like the quality of the cinematic goes up the more engaged the player actor is?
Right.
And then on the other end, basically making it as smooth as possible. Like they can have a bad cinematic if
Yeah.
they're just not engaging, but the cinematic will get to the end eventually.
Right.
Like making it so that like Ethan doesn't actually need the book. It's
Right.
just is a better scene if you give him the book.
Yes. Yes. It's a great question. And in this scene, he needs the book, I think, but regardless, let's say he doesn't need the book. In the game that we're shooting, we put in a few moments like that where you don't want, like at the barbecue, I don't want, or like Ethan, like you're saying with the book, let's say he doesn't need the book, he knows the book is there, that's all he needs. The book is is indicative of something, and he's already learned it. You had the book, I can't believe you had the book. Ethan doesn't need the book now, that's fine, let's take that as the foundation. Then you don't need to hand the book over. The system, it can be a time trigger, where we've done that where a character is wounded, dying, and another character, one of the other NPCs, says, put your hand on his chest and stem the bleeding. But we didn't shoot an idle loop for everybody. Because if we're waiting for you to execute that request in order to move on, then everyone in the scene needs to be in an idle loop waiting. While this guy is dying, and this guy's saying, put your hand on his chest to stem the bleeding. And you're like, well, you do it. He's like, put your hand on his chest. And you're like, I don't want to. You're like, he's dying. He's like, well, do something then. You don't want to exist in that. So what we did was we just gave it a natural sort of, an I love you beat count, and then moved on where you could put your hand on the chest, and then there would be some haptics, that gives you the feeling of a beating heart in the controller, for example. And it's a little Easter egg. You can do it. To your point, the scene is better. It's more immersive, but you don't need to. The scene will move on. So we are doing things like that. Yeah. Does anyone else have any ideas about or thoughts on what that question was about? Okay, great. Did I answer your question in some way? Great. Any other thoughts? Yeah. More off topic, better.
Projects of like VR theater, the underpresents, which their whole thing is having live actors, sort of like hired real live actors in there with experience. They have sort of their own sort of tool set where they can trigger events and do this and that. Obviously it's super cool, but any thoughts or something about that?
When we're talking about, what was the idea you're talking about?
The underpresents, so it's a press game. And yeah, so they actually have live actors, live paid actors
Right.
in there with the people.
Gotcha.
And kind of like what you were talking about, like walking out the room, it's sort of like a Sleep No More thing, where
That's right.
the entire building, everywhere is the experience.
Yeah. I love that. And Sleep No More was a huge touchstone for me. Like Sleep No More is an immersive piece of theater that I think is still going in New York. A British company. I can't remember the name of the company. Doesn't matter really to this conversation. But they took over a 4 or 5 floor warehouse in New York, and they art directed every single corner, every floor, every room, and that's the theater. Like we were saying, like this convention center is the theater. Imagine that this convention center, kind of ECGC did. They've come in, they've set up, they've art directed this space for the convention, for the East Coast game. And so then you can move around as you want. There's not really a narrative to that, whereas in Sleep No More, they take one of Shakespeare's plays, the Scottish play, and they use it as a loose framework for the way they tell their story throughout 3.5 hours in that space. And you as an audience member can go wherever the heck you want. You're given a mask. That's an interesting point. The audience are given a mask and the performers are not. So you know who the performers are by virtue of the fact that they're not wearing a mask. And so you can go wherever you want. I could sit in that chair next to, you're wearing a mask, so you're an audience member. But you're not wearing a mask, so you're a performer. And I could come and sit next to you if you were there, if I wanted to. And then if you got up and left, I could follow you, or I could stay. You could engage in a scene out there. I could go catch that scene, or, I think there's a scene back here. I could go catch this scene, and you guys could all follow me. And I've worked in theater like that, and it presents similar challenges in an analog, in the analog, as it does in making VR, because it's a whole lot harder to make sure the audience sees the thing you want them to see, or you just like put your hands in the air and say, I'm not going to guide you. You can catch it. We've considered every moment on every floor, and you can go wherever you want, and we'll slowly start to funnel you down to the climax, which is what they do at Sleep No More. They start closing off floors, and everyone's got to come back down, and everyone is there for the big climax. So that's a way of, to your point earlier about how do you make sure that they see the thing? Well, you close the door, and they can't go in that room anymore, for example. I directed a play. I think we're getting over time here. I directed the play in the basement of a restaurant. A couple minutes. play took place in a restaurant, and I approached this restaurant because I knew they had a space in their basement, which was basically like the employee lounge, and asked if I could have it for a month, and they loved it. So, because people came to the play, then went upstairs and ate afterwards. It was a lovely symbiotic relationship. But the play, the context of the play was that we were in the basement of a fine dining restaurant, and so I directed it in the basement, and so that the audience could hear the people who were upstairs, who were not part of the play. They were here eating at the restaurant, but by virtue of being there, they were entirely part of the play. I didn't need a sound design because the sound design was actually happening upstairs. The audience came in through the restaurant and went down to the play downstairs. In that instance, it's slightly different because I had them sit. So that it wasn't an entirely immersive, it was more site-specific. Had they been able to walk around sort of with free will, that's more immersive for me. The fact that we were in a restaurant made it more site-specific. But I love that kind of theater, and I think we're going more and more in that direction. You see the immersive Klimts and Van Goghs, and people want events, and they want to be part of the event. Especially, I think, especially now, coming out of 2 years of being more and more isolated, I love theater that is opening up and bringing people into it, and rather than having them sit in it like this, letting them just experience it as they will. The important part for me is that we all come together as people, as a community, and experience the event together, but separately. In Sleep No More, I could have spent the whole time on the 5th floor. You could have spent it on the 3rd. You could have gone up and down all night long. We would have had different experiences, but we'd still be able to talk about that event. We would have that common language. So I guess that's where we're at, guys. I think unless you got something else you want to ask me in this room, I think we need to leave this room. We can talk out there, but that's it. So thank you very much, and thank you to Richard Gansky for being up here.